Yeah, which is this chapter. So I would say, I mean, in the past few years, I too am fully an activist. Like I've been fully convinced that there's something to the enactivist approach, and I try to, in my own thinking, be it in my work in AI or just my interest in philosophy, I try to take the enactivist approach. But it's chapter 10. This the only part that I'm still sort of battling or trying to really get my head around or wrap my head around is this idea of abstract thinking. And then in this book, in chapter 10, the last one, the practice of thinking, 10.4, you even talk about doing the math, which, perhaps this is true, is the most abstract thinking that a human being does, like in terms of especially advanced mathematics. And I could say, my background in computer science, in theoretical computer science especially, it is very abstract, but there's still, I don't know, if you really push it, there probably is still something embodied in how you think about even like algorithms and how, step by step kind of they go. But I don't know if you could say the same thing to mathematics. So anyway, this is a long-winded way of me asking, yeah, how would you explain something like the notion of abstract thinking through an activist lens?
Yeah, so it's part of what I was trying to do there, and other people have also tried to do this, and they've taken different approaches. I focus on the notion that thinking is a kind of practice, and that it's a practice that we can be skilled in, and that 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 skill to me is in a certain way continuous with embodied processes. So if you look at performance studies, and talk about skilled performance, right? Bodily processes are very much included in that. And it's about how body and environment, work together. How, what constitutes a skill, in any game or any athletic contest or any performing arts. It's always about the environment. It's always about the body, and we can tell a story all about that. But the idea is that what we find there are certain practices, and the idea that I have practiced doing things in order to gain skill in the performance. But I think we can just continue that story when it comes to higher order, or more. I think an activists like to say more complex uh, cognitive processes that involve imagination, that involve memory, that involve mathematics, problem solving, and so forth. We can use similar notions that we use in sort of thinking about performance. We can use notions about affordances, for example, and think about, and people have started to talk about now, about cognitive affordances. And in the book, I suggest, we sometimes use concepts as an affordance to solve a problem. Uh, in the same way that we might use a certain strategy if we're trying to solve a math problem. And we would say, well, this strategy will afford one way to solve the problem, or I could take this other way. I could, use a different practice in order to solve the problem. But it seems to me that um, the way of describing what we're doing when we're doing something like math problem solving is very similar to what we're doing in terms of uh, adjusting the environment. And in some cases, when we do math, that's exactly what we're doing. We're using pencil and paper. We're drawing graphs. This goes back to Charles Sanders Peirce, his diagram, his idea that diagrams are really a kind of external way of thinking. The extended mind idea sort of was already there in Peirce in that respect. So how do we accomplish this higher order thinking or this more complex thinking? Oftentimes it's a kind of continuous process that we can relate to manipulating things out there in the environment, or starting to manipulate concepts in our head, so to speak. That seems very similar. We could maybe imagine, what we do out here in the environment. We just kind of imagine doing it, and then that helps us to solve the problem. With the idea of the imagination also, I really like Gilbert Ryle's chapter in The Concept of Mind, if you're familiar with that. He has a chapter on imagination where he says the imagination really is grounded in bodily practices. So we look at how children start to imagine, and they might imagine in their play, they play at being a bear. And he says, well, what does that mean to imagine being a bear? It means the child starts gnashing its teeth and growling and, using claws. It's all about movement and action, taking action. And that's where imagination begins. And all that kind of manipulation that we do at the beginning when we start to think in a mathematical way, that also ties into movement and action, bodily action, which then sort of is the basis for more complex kinds of thinking. So that at least, there's a number, and I say a good number of people who are trying to make that argument in the book, and have pointed out the close connection between bodily movement, action, solving mathematical problems, and so forth. I think there's an argument there. Again, it's one way to try to solve that kind of scaling up problem. It's usually referred to. Other people have said, well, look, let's just look at the social processes involved. That, how do we do our thinking? And we can think oftentimes with other people in conversations. We can solve problems, or we can dream up ideas. We can discover new concepts by having a conversation with someone, and something emerges from that wasn't there before. And of course, that's the basis of learning. And so we can start talking about scaling up on the basis of the kind of social interactions that we engage in, which are themselves bodily, gestural, all of that kind of set of practices that we engage in.
No doubt. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned social processes, because if I could use an example here, I'm a software engineer, it's my day job, and I would say, no doubt, that the most important thing to becoming a good software engineer is pair programming, where you literally work on a problem with another engineer or programmer. And it's really odd, because it's something almost, if I could romanticize it, something almost sublime that happens, where when you're working on a problem with another person, in a way, your mind is in their mind and their mind is in your mind. There's like a synchrony that takes place. And I this is what I always say, like, I've been doing a bit of mentoring with some undergrads and some junior programmers. I tell them, if I know you can easily use an LLM and like get some code, but if you're learning to program, try your best to do it with others, do it with other people, be it your peers or perhaps a senior engineer. Because first of all, if it's a senior engineer, you will learn things as you pair program, but also in like a very fundamental sense, you can't think without having some some affordance from another person, or even literally your computer. You program on your computer and you think while you're programming. It's not like you have the program in your head and then you go write it. You think while writing with your computer, or while writing the code. So yeah, there are some fascinating connections there. I think I would say, if I'm being honest, Professor Gallagher, the only part I struggle with is the mathematics bit, because at least I probably have a very naive understanding of mathematics, where I think, oh, it's just these genius, professors like working on like abstract computation. But even with them, they would of course use a board or some kind of physical device to do their work, I assume, for their calculations. Excellent. All right. So yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just saying, sitting in a PhD, an economics seminar, PhD seminar, and it was beyond me. I mean, because it was highly mathematical, but I was working on a master's degree in economics, and I could follow conceptually what was happening, but I couldn't do the math. This guy, the teacher, was just up there on the board, and it looked like the mathematics were in his fingers or coming out of the chalk. This is totally, that's the way they thought. But they were thinking by writing on the board, and that was the kind of movement, the kind of action that they were engaged in. And it's not clear that they could just sit still and do that kind of thinking in any kind of prolonged and complex fashion.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah, it takes a bit of, in a way, I mean, I guess you would call it a flow state, but when I do a bit of calculus and stuff just because I'm for the machine learning work. Obviously not in any way as advanced as what they'd be doing in university, but in a way, when you start interacting with her, just like, I mean, I've got my textbook right here, or just working on the thing, you get into like a flow state where you even don't realize how much of your thinking is sort of extended out to the world, be it a computer or like a piece of paper. So it's a really bizarre phenomena if you just reflect on it, to be honest. Excellent.